Valentine's Day may be over, but the romance can continue year-round. A life coach and mom of 7 reveals her 3 ways to have a fight-free marriage.
Our calendars are so full, I get it, but if we always think that our relationship, the quality of our relationship is going to be determined by external circumstances, we're always going to be trying to change the circumstances.
And that includes the one thing you should be doing every day.
But I don't have time to have sex. I don't have time for intimacy every day. But we have to think about it in a different way, because I believe that sex is a multiplier. It's rejuvenating.
And have you gotten hit with the flu? The CDC is seeing cases on the rise. We explain why this year's flu season seems to be hitting the country hard. That's today on Mom Squad. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle, and just a warning, this episode is going to get slightly steamy, just slightly, because this is still a family show. But let's just say this might be the first episode my husband will reference more than any other. Today, we are focusing on relationships and how to make them stronger. In a few minutes, my expert will go into the 3 ways she keeps her marriage fight-free. But first, let's take a look at why we fight. A group of psychologists took a look at more than 200 couples back in 2019. They wanted to know what they disagreed about the most. They found that all the various reasons came down to 6 categories: inadequate attention or affection, jealousy and infidelity, chores and responsibilities, sex, control and dominance, future plans, and money. No matter what it is, no one wants tension in a relationship. And considering we are just coming off of Valentine's Day, we figured it would be a great time to talk about how to make our relationships stronger. I sat down with Hannah Keeley, a certified life coach who is a mother of 7 and married for over 30 years. She coaches parents and families on how to live happier lives. But she has key ways to stay fight-free. Hannah, this is the month a lot of people are taking an extra look at their relationship. I mean, Valentine's Day is one thing, but February, we're kind of like all cooped up. Like there's a lot of time for one-on-one conversations, et cetera. Do you find, as you have conversations with clients and other people that you speak with, that we're focused a little bit more on our relationships in February?
It's so funny because usually we think about February as being a cold month, right? And so we're kind of holed up inside. And that would be pretty bad to not want to be with the people you're holed up with. You know, you kind of want to share the space together and enjoy the time together.
Right. So having a healthy relationship is something everyone strives for. The day in, the day out sometimes makes things complicated. What would you say when you're talking with those clients? What are they coming to you going, oh my gosh, we're having such a problem with X, Y, or Z?
You know, I find that we like to attribute our relationship problems to external circumstances, like, oh, the kids. I mean, we have 7 kids. They're all grown. We have grandkids, but it's like, oh, the kids are so demanding, or the work, or, you know, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you're growing a business, taking care of the home, all the things, right? Our calendars are so full. I get it. But if we always think that our relationship, the quality of our relationship is going to be determined by external circumstances, we're always going to be trying to change the circumstances and not change the perspective that we take in that relationship.
Interesting. So what kind of, you mentioned the external, but what is it then that like we're looking at internally?
Oh, so many things. There's so many factors that go into having a really healthy relationship. I know with me and my husband, you know, we've been married we've married about 34 years, I believe, if I can do the math correctly. And we've developed some strategies to make sure that relationship is always intimate and positive, and it's a source of strength instead of taking away from you. And I think one of the biggest things, honestly, is to get rid of all the shoulds. Like every time I have helped someone in a relationship, it always goes back to a perspective of this person should be different. They should talk to me differently. They should do this around the house. They should show up like this. And I find that when we do that, I call it, we just should all over each other, Like, what if we could let go of those shoulds and realize, what if I give them freedom to be who they are? And I do the work on myself, thinking maybe they shouldn't be any different at all.
Oh, interesting. So then how do you frame it in your mind instead of thinking of, they should be helping out more, they should be doing this? Like, so then what word are we replacing that with?
Okay, this is interesting. I don't replace it with the word. I play around with the should.
Okay.
So it's like, for example, he should respect me more. Or maybe he should not respect me more. Or maybe I should respect myself more. It always comes down to something at the core of that we don't really want to embrace. And as soon as we look at it, examine it, embrace it, then we can do the work around it and realize, wait, it was actually in me the whole time. I didn't need to change them. I needed to change myself.
Oh, interesting. So then it's almost like sitting down. I mean, how do you get to that point? You got to sit down and really think about, how can I change myself before you're looking at somebody else?
Well, you do, but here's another thing. Communication is so important in a relationship. And I think most people just don't have the proper communication skills. We're always wanting to be heard instead of wanting to understand. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, we always want, like, I've got this message I got to get across, and let me wait for this person to stop talking so I can explain myself and make sure they understand me. But that's so intuitive. What if we did something that was more counterintuitive? So I always suggest in marriages, I know this sounds kind of weird, but communicate like a hostage negotiator. Like a hostage negotiator, we always want to get hostile in the relationship, right? And it leads to division, it leads to frustration. But what if we could decide there's a win-win here? That's how a negotiator thinks about it. There's a place where I win and they win. What is that place? And that only can occur if you really try to understand the person. So don't listen for a place to interrupt and explain. Listen to actually understand.
Do you have an example, like, pick on yourself, like in your own marriage or like when you're talking to people? Is there an example of that win-win? Because I think when you're I'm asking because when you're in that moment, you want to win the argument. Like we've all been there, whether it's with our spouse or somebody else. I mean, you just are so focused on, well, they have to understand my point. So like, if you can put that into an example too, or a story for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a ton of stories, but we always want to think, instead of being right, what if I could just do right? And do right is to understand the person. So I remember one time I was so overwhelmed. Like I felt like everything was falling apart around me. My business was crumbling. It was shortly after my mom had passed, and I just really couldn't get my footing. It was very hard. And I remember thinking, I need you to support me more. I can't do all this on my own. And when I paused long enough to listen to myself, I was thinking, wait a minute, I feel incapable. I feel weak. And he really heard me. And instead of him saying, hey, I do support you. I'm showing up every day for you. I'm doing all this for you. You don't see it. He was quiet. I'll never forget that day. We were sitting in the car. He was so quiet. And he said, you're okay. You're safe. What happened was I'm trying to find a way for him to be different. And I was just overwhelmed. It was coming from me. And what he heard when he really listened to me, she doesn't feel safe. So instead of defending himself, he listened and he responded with, you're safe. I got you. That's all I needed to hear at that time.
Yeah. Any communication, any relationship needs active listening. Yes. I mean, we need to practice this with everybody. And before we move on to one of your other points, which is definitely for a romantic relationship, would these other two points that you've made about communication and the should, does that also work with your kids?
Oh, 100%. Because think about it, with every child, I think a mom can understand their unique wiring. And so every kid is different. I have 7 kids. They're all so vastly different, but I understand how they're wired. So when they are getting upset, when they're frustrated, when they're getting into trouble, I'm always thinking, what is at the root of this? And that's where I try to communicate. And so the more you really understand how a person is wired, and the more you let go of that idea that they should be different, then you can really understand and meet them at that beautiful place where transformation can actually happen.
Right, because our kids are also watching us as adults, how we're communicating, how we are arguing. I mean, everybody argues. There's nobody who doesn't. And you know, there's a difference between an argument and then an all-out brawl fight.
Absolutely.
So our kids are watching how we're communicating. And do you ever sit them down and explain these communication processes with them?
Well, you know, I notice with kids, more is caught than taught. And they watch how my husband, Blair, and I, how we communicate, how we love each other, how we are each other's, you know, best friends. And they have been able to bring that into their own relationships. They're all adults now. And so they're able to foster that in their relationships. And it's so funny because when you're in a surrounding of positivity and when you see the examples, it almost becomes natural. It becomes unnatural to fight, to put walls up, to be defensive, or to be hostile. That becomes unnatural.
We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Hannah talks about getting romantic every day, as in really romantic. Who has time for that? She says everyone. We'll be right back. Welcome back. When it comes to relationships, every couple argues. I tried to find some scientifically backed statistics, but I found a lot of general information saying a third of couples argue once a week, another third once a month, and the remaining group says once or twice a year. No matter how often you argue, there's a healthy approach. Things you can do so you don't do major damage to the foundation of your relationship. We've been talking with Hannah Keeley, a certified life coach who specializes in parenting and families. So far, she's been telling us how to approach arguments so there's a win-win for both of you, and how to not use the word should all the time. But it's the third point that she makes that's really going to catch some attention. Let's also talk about the other point you make, which is intimacy.
Yes.
Talk to me about, I don't know. When I looked at what you were pitching here, I'm like, oh my gosh, who has time? But go into
That's
your
so
other
true.
philosophy.
Yeah, we are strong believers in daily intimacy. Now, I know we all go through different chapters. There is a mom who is in her 30s, maybe 20s, and is like, there is no way, because my kids are little, maybe in the 40s, maybe in your 50s, but it's like so many things are grabbing from me. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to have sex. I don't have time for intimacy every day. But we have to think about it in a different way, because I believe that sex is a multiplier. It's rejuvenating. It is a source of strength instead of taking from you. And when it's not, we have to do the work around that. Like, why am I thinking this is taking away from my life? Why do I think this is an expense more than an asset that's allowing me to show up as a stronger person? So I'm a firm believer. Like, I get it sometimes, like work schedules, kids schedules, we're tired. You don't always have time for sex, but can you have daily intimacy? Can you embrace? Can you touch? Can you just take, like, if you look at how much time you spent scrolling on your phone, just try that one day. What if you spent that much time being intimate, having sex with your spouse? I think the marriage would look pretty powerful.
Yeah. I've also, in the past, talked to a relationship coach, and she even talked about just like kissing for 5 seconds, like just count, like for 5 to 10 seconds every day, making sure that you're having that contact, that there's something that happens physically that makes us feel more connected to that person. Is that kind of your point too? Is that you have to have that physical touch, no matter what, that touch point every day, to come back to a softer point in your relationship?
I see that. That makes a lot of sense. I love to go deeper, though. I always like to go to the core of a behavior than just the behavior itself. So awesome idea to have that 5-second kiss, to slow down enough and really tune in and really connect. But what is it that is resisting that? So when couples are like, we only have sex like maybe once a week or maybe a few times a month, I'm like, we have to do the work around what is the resistance? why don't I? Why don't I want to? Why don't I feel like it? And usually it comes from something within ourselves where we don't feel like a strong sexual person. We don't fully embrace who we are. Maybe we're holding shame, condemnation, judgment over ourselves. Maybe we're not giving ourselves permission to really show up as a beautiful, strong sexual person. And when we start to do that work and step into our own identity, then I think sex becomes just natural.
It's so interesting because all of these points come back to, and I think this is a good reminder, that it's a lot of within ourselves. Like when you're feeling like there might be some tension or you're kind of butting heads with your significant other, sometimes it's like, oh, it's the relationship. But what you keep pointing out is it's a lot of like what we're dealing with internally with our own selves.
You know, all the roads lead right back to you.
Yeah.
It always starts there. And that's why I see so many times people get frustrated. They're like, I've tried every diet, I can't lose the weight, or I've tried every budgeting program, I can't get a hold of my finances, or I've tried every parenting technique, I can't raise my kid right. It doesn't come down to the behavior. It really comes down to the being. Who are you? How are you processing things? That's why the coaching and the programs I do are so different, because it always goes back to how we're wired. We look at that, we make some shifts, and all of a sudden it's just like it's like magic. Things just operate so much smoother out of that.
Yeah. Tell me more about your programs. Like, what would you have somebody do to start to work on themselves?
Oh my goodness. Well, we first have to become aware. So that's a big thing that I work with moms, I work with marriages. The first thing is be aware of yourself. What am I doing? What is the internal dialogue that's going on in my head all the time? And as soon as we're able to interrupt that, then we can start to incorporate other thoughts. And you know what? It all comes down to what you believe. And a belief is just a thought that we think over and over and over. So what if we could train our brains? What if we could train our brains to think, I am such a beautiful person. I am so connected with my spouse. I crave my spouse. Like, what if we could work with those thoughts and liberate ourselves from all this negativity and this toxic thoughts that are keeping us really just trapped?
Yeah. So you have programs where can people find you and your programs if they're interested?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can always go to hannahkeeley.com, and you can follow me on Instagram. But one thing that I love working with moms, because I've been researching the mom brain for so long, and I do have a program called Mom Brain Makeover. You can just go in there, figure out what is going on with your brain, and start to do a little rewiring. And I think you're going to be really happy with the results.
Oh my gosh, I think we all need that. I did a
Yes.
whole episode about how mom brain is real with a neurologist. I mean, it is actually, it's not just a myth. It's not just us imagining things. This is like actually happening in our brains. I think we all need to rewire, Hannah.
Absolutely. Yeah, check out mombrainmakeover.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was so great to chat with you and great reminders about communication.
Oh, I always have such a good time. Thanks for having me.
A big thank you again to Hannah Keeley. Well, coming up, Google's new feature that helps you monitor your kids' smartphone use. And if you think this flu season has been bad, it's not your imagination. We break down exactly why everyone is getting sick. Welcome back. Kids and cell phone use is always a hot topic on this show. Parents have many concerns when it comes to how much their kids are plugged in and when they are using devices. Google just recently introduced a tool called Google Family Link, which allows parents to monitor their kids' cell phone use more closely. What's new about Family Link is that parents can place time limits on specific devices, like one time limit for the phone and another time limit for a smartwatch. Google is also rolling out a feature called School Time 2. Now, this allows parents to minimize distractions on any device during school hours, but they can also schedule a break during recess or lunch so that kids can use the device during that specific time. Meanwhile, your kids might have been home from school recently with some sort of illness. This year, the flu has been rampant across the country, some states getting hit harder than others. Trayson Bragg from our Houston station explains why this year's flu is worse than years past.
Why is this flu season so bad? The flu is taking its toll right now. Now, schools across the country are being forced to close as cases climb, and hospitals report their emergency rooms are filling up with flu sufferers. In fact, the CDC reports in the last week of January, close to 50,000 flu patients were admitted to U.S. hospitals. And when you look at a map of flu activity in the country, Texas is front and center as a hotspot for flu activity. Experts say a number of factors are making this flu season so severe. For one, the timing is off this season. Normally, flu cases start to ramp up in October and peak in January. But this season, cases didn't start to take off until the end of the year, right when kids were headed back to school from their holiday break, helping it to spread. Vaccination rates have also been low. The CDC aims for 70% of people to be vaccinated each season, but so far, only around 44% of adults and kids have been vaccinated. The good news for most of us is that it is not too late to get the vaccine. You can also protect yourself by practicing good hygiene, like washing your hands and avoiding contact with sick people. If you do end up catching it, most people can recover at home with lots of rest, liquids, and over-the-counter medicine. If you continue to have a high fever, difficulty breathing, or persistent vomiting, it's time to head to the hospital.
If you are interested in how to best keep your family healthy, check out our previous Mom Squad episodes. Just a few weeks ago, we talked to a pediatrician about how to strengthen your immune system and what to do if your kids get sick. You can catch all of these episodes streaming in your local news app or on the Mom Squad YouTube page. I'm Maureen Kyle. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We'll see you back here next time.